The Metroid series has influenced games in many strange ways over the years. They've introduced many concepts that would be the founding principles of the Metroidvania and also brought about many style directions for sci-fi games as well. Now that the Metroid series is nearing its 30th anniversary, we're seeing an interesting trend of games paying homage to its familiar style. One of these games is Environmental Station Alpha, recently released on Steam. Environmental Station Alpha, or ESA, is a 2D action platformer set in a derelict space station in the remains of a destroyed planet. Abandoned for several decades, the station has once again regained power and is showing signs of activity. You play as a nondescript robot tasked with figuring out what's going on in this station, however it's plain to see that this mission will not be easy. ESA is a game that is heavily influenced by the Metroid series, and it shows in many of the gameplay and design choices the developer made. However, it does many of its own stunts to set itself apart from the stigma of a Metroid clone. The gameplay of ESA is rudimentary in nature but very tight in terms of execution. You start with only movement, jumping, and a basic gun attack. Naturally, you get more abilities to expand on this game, but the controls remain the same. As players gain more power-ups, only 2 more buttons get unlocked for mobility, which keeps the controls simple and intuitive. Many of the power-ups in the game are meant to augment the player's experience rather than introduce new mechanics. Many things such as the double jump, the triple shot, the satellite shield, and other power-ups make the character stronger without editing the controls at all. The lack of complexity in controls also helps with keeping the game's pacing. Players are never stuck trying to get a grip on the new mechanics. Everything is very quick to internalize and helps keep the pace going as the player tries to figure out which levels to explore next. Level design is another great asset for this game. The game has you traverse across a handful of biomes with varying hazards that are expected from these zones. Fire zones are hot, water zones require swimming, you know the drill. However, ESA keeps things fresh by making each zone evolve as the game progresses. A noticeable hang-up for many people towards the Metroidvania genre is the backtracking, which is understandable for many of the games. ESA, however, was well aware of this issue and circumvented this by having their levels evolve with the game progression. As players reach certain milestones in the plot, the levels change to follow suit with the story and power-ups acquired. New paths begin to appear, old paths get harder, some paths get cut off, new enemies appear, and so on. This helps to keep the game fresh in a neat way, effectively forcing players to relearn an area and forget any behaviors they have previously established. The areas themselves are also well designed in nature. Each area will have zones that let you play with your new power-up to learn it, then test your ability to integrate every new mechanic you've learned up to this point. ESA manages to do a great job with taking a simple game experience and designing a game so brilliantly around it. ESA's general design direction, however, leaves a bit to be desired. The game is presented in a style emulating the 8-bit games from the early years of gaming, which is somewhat hit and miss. The general environments look fantastic, with areas having a distinct look and atmosphere to them that makes them memorable and easy to recollect when solving puzzles. Character designs, however, are very low resolution and tiny, which disappointed me in some ways. Given the sheer amount of detail and love put into these environmental tilesets, it's really jarring to see the main character and many monsters be 12 pixels total in detail. Further going into design, the game really does jack a few design choices from the old Metroids early on, with the first 2 biomes basically being Criteria and Brinstar from Super Metroid. The music in this game is really good, but also somewhat repetitive. The game's soundtrack is entirely composed of whimsical ambient music barring the boss theme, and while the music is really nice to listen to, it all feels very similar and sometimes clashes with the game's environments. This is especially noticeable in the Fire Zone and Temple areas, where songs that should evoke a sense of danger or dread are instead the same chill ambience as the last 3 stages. The writing in this game is interesting, however players have to put a fair bit of work into the game to acquire it. Most of the game's plot is loaded at the end of the game, not only across 4 different endings but also behind a cipher that players must decode across several clues hidden through the game. Now, I personally adored this concept. It's what kept me going across the entire endgame segment since I felt the drive to actually solve the mystery of the space station and the events that occurred. However, I could see this killing the interest of many players. The cryptology work can be very uninviting to the average consumer, and the lack of a distinct story across most of the game may lead players having no motivation to continue on. While the gameplay for ESA is really enjoyable, the design choices of the game are somewhat tough to swallow. The game engine for ESA is surprisingly well done. The game uses little to no processing power or memory, and the game uses a total of 70 megabytes on my hard drive. I'm honestly surprised the developer hasn't tried to make a phone version of this game because the game engine is sleek and compact enough for it. ESA supports keyboard, mouse, and controllers, and luckily the game isn't tied to X input but rather recognizes most controller inputs. So PlayStation and third-party controllers will have an easy time setting up this game. Given the game's aesthetics and genre, the options are somewhat bare bones, but at least the essentials are there. Players can edit volume levels, set windowed mode and scaling, edit controller inputs, and toggle holding down a button for jump height. I did have one strange hang-up with the game, however. Sometimes whenever I would alt-tab out of the game in full screen mode, I would return to the game being stretched horizontally for some reason. This hang-up can be fixed by going back to the title screen, but it might throw a few people off if they are multitasking. For a quiet indie release on Steam, this game performed incredibly well compared to many other indie contemporaries and a lot of AAA games. Environmental Station Alpha is probably one of my favorite indie games released this year. While the game took a few risks with some design elements, I personally had a blast throughout the 15 hours it took for me to beat it. The game is $7 on Steam and the developer's website, so if you want a very tight and engaging action platformer, then I would highly recommend Environmental Station Alpha. It's pretty much the classic Metroid experience for the modern age of gamers.